It began as a routine arrest on the outskirts of Nashville, the kind of operation that rarely makes national headlines. But by the time federal agents finished processing the evidence, investigators realized they had stumbled into a financial network so vast, so deeply embedded, that it connected refugee neighborhoods in the American Midwest to cartel drug routes in Mexico and militant financing channels in the Middle East. State and federal task force agents described it as one of the most complex cases they had ever worked, not because of violence or shootouts, but because of time, trust, and patience. This operation had been running quietly for years, hidden in plain sight, protected by cultural familiarity and community goodwill. What followed would expose a system that moved nearly $890 million through informal money channels, funneling cartel profits and terror-linked funds through a Detroit-area neighborhood few Americans had ever heard of. A quiet morning on Warren Avenue. The air in Dearborn that November morning was sharp and unforgiving. Frost clung to car windshields and storefront windows, turning the streetlights into halos of pale orange glow. Warren Avenue, a corridor lined with Iraqi-owned bakeries, cafes, grocery stores, and phone shops, was still asleep. Security gates were pulled tight. Sidewalks were empty. The neighborhood had been quiet for hours. But inside a modest brick building tucked between a halal butcher and a cell phone repair shop, the lights were on. For nearly 2 decades, Kareem Hassan Al-Dami, age 56, had arrived early at his business, Al-Rafadadan Money Exchange, to review transactions before customers arrived. On this morning, he sat alone in the back office, leafing through handwritten ledgers with the practiced calm of a man who believed he understood every risk he had taken. A wire confirmation sat on his desk, a transfer for just over $2.2 million, routed through channels he knew by heart. It had nothing to do with refugee families or remittances home. At 6:19 a.m., the silence ended. FBI, search warrant, open the door. The command echoed from multiple directions at once. Front entrance, side door, rear exit. Boots struck pavement, vehicles idled. For a brief moment, Al-Dami didn't move. Years of carefully maintained trust, years of community standing, years of being seen as a helper and protector. Everything he had built collapsed into that single sound. The door gave way. A trusted figure in a vulnerable community. To the Iraqi refugee community of Dearborn, Kareem Al-Dami was more than a business owner. He was a bridge to home. After fleeing Iraq in 2006 amid sectarian violence, Al-Dami and his family arrived in Michigan with little more than suitcases and hope. By 2007, he opened a small money exchange storefront, naming it Al-Rafadadan, a reference to the Tigris and Euphrates, the twin rivers that symbolized Iraq itself. His service was simple: help people send money back to relatives still struggling overseas. He charged lower fees than major money transfer companies. He spoke Arabic fluently. He didn't interrogate customers about paperwork or immigration status. For refugees working long hours in factories, driving taxis, washing dishes, or juggling multiple jobs, Al-Rafadadan became essential. Elderly women brought folded cash wrapped in cloth. Fathers sent money for school books. Young men transferred funds to rebuild damaged homes. Widows supported orphaned nieces and nephews. Al-Dami sponsored mosque events, donated during Ramadan, hired people others wouldn't. During the pandemic, he personally delivered food to quarantined families. Trust was his currency, and that trust would become the perfect disguise. What agents found inside? The front office of Al-Rafadadan looked exactly as customers remembered it: a scuffed counter, bilingual forms, exchange rate posters faded by time, a prayer rug folded neatly in the corner. But the back office told a different story.
3 laptops sat open, each running encrypted messaging platforms. A heavy safe bolted to the floor stood ajar, holding $1.7 million in vacuum-sealed cash. 11 prepaid phones lay nearby, their call logs showing recent contact with numbers traced to Lebanon, western Mexico, and northern Colombia. Then, agents opened the filing cabinet. Inside were 2 sets of books. One, clean, organized, compliant, listed thousands of small transactions, $200 to Baghdad, $400 to Basra, $600 to Erbil. These were the transfers reported to state regulators. The second set, locked in a fireproof container, told the real story. The entries were coded, written partially in Arabic, partially in numeric shorthand. Transfers measured in hundreds of thousands, destinations linked to shell companies and individuals already flagged in federal databases. One entry documented $2.34 million sent to an account labeled as an operational fund tied to Hezbollah. Another showed repeated transfers routed through Mexican fronts connected to the Sinaloa cartel. This was not accidental, it was systematic. Hawala, an ancient system, modern weapon. At the center of the operation was Hawala, an informal money transfer system that predates modern banking by centuries. Hawala runs on trust rather than paperwork. A customer gives cash to a local dealer who contacts a partner elsewhere to pay out the equivalent amount. No money crosses borders, no banks are involved. Accounts are balanced later through trade, cash shipments, or offsetting transactions. For immigrants and refugees, Hawala is often the only viable option, especially when banking systems back home have collapsed or when formal accounts are inaccessible. But the same qualities that make Hawala essential also make it dangerous. No automated reporting, no centralized oversight, no obvious trail. If illicit funds are mixed with legitimate transfers, they become nearly invisible. Al-Dami understood this better than most. How the scheme worked. When cartel operatives needed to move drug proceeds from Detroit to Mexico, they brought cash to Al-Rafadadan. Al-Dami recorded the funds as dozens or hundreds of small refugee transfers. He then contacted his Hawala partners in Mexico, who paid cartel operatives locally. The money never crossed a border. To settle balances, Al-Dami used cartel cash to fund legitimate payouts to refugees in Iraq. Meanwhile, Hezbollah-linked donations moved through the same channels in reverse. Clean money disguised dirty money disguised clean money. The system laundered both terrorism financing and narcotics profits simultaneously. The cost beyond the numbers. Over 6 years, investigators estimate $890 million flowed through the network. Of that, approximately $127 million was tied to Hezbollah-linked entities. Roughly $340 million represented cartel drug proceeds. DEA analysts concluded that the drug money laundered through Al-Rafadadan corresponded to fentanyl sales responsible for thousands of overdose deaths across the United States. Hezbollah funding linked to the network supported operations in Syria, Yemen, and southern Lebanon, but the deepest wounds were local. When news of the raid spread, community members gathered outside the storefront in stunned silence. Elderly men wept openly. Women clutched their coats against the cold. One woman, Fatima, told reporters she had trusted Al-Dami for money for her grandson's surgery. She said, "I thought he was helping us. How could he do this?" A community betrayed twice. The Iraqi refugee community faced not only personal heartbreak, but fear. Fear that their trust had been exploited. Fear that Americans would now view them with suspicion. At a packed mosque meeting days later, an imam addressed the crowd. "We fled violence. We rebuilt our lives. One man's greed does not define us. We will cooperate. We will prove who we are." Still, the damage lingered. Many stopped using money transfer services altogether. Others turned to formal banks, absorbing higher fees and language barriers. Trust, once broken, proved difficult to restore. Operation Two Rivers expands. The raid on Al-Rafadadan was only the beginning. In the weeks that followed, federal agents executed warrants across Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, uncovering a nationwide network of cooperating Hawala dealers. 7 additional businesses were directly linked. Encrypted messages revealed al-Dami communicating knowingly with Hezbollah operatives. One message read, "The resistance thanks you." His reply, "Honored to serve." There was no ambiguity. Arrests and consequences. 34 people were arrested as part of Operation Two Rivers. Karim Hassan al-Dami faces up to 65 years in federal prison. His brother, cousin, and associates face decades more. Assets seized include bank accounts, luxury vehicles, real estate, and business holdings totaling over $100 million. Lessons that cannot be ignored. This case revealed uncomfortable truths. Criminals exploit trust.
Before anything else, oversight gaps allow massive networks to operate unnoticed. Entire communities suffer when trust is betrayed, and informal financial systems, while vital, can be weaponized. The question investigators now ask is not whether this network was unique, but how many others exist, operating quietly, protected by familiarity, moving money in plain sight.